All right, we are on Hebrews chapter 11. Kathy was in the middle of Worsby. Remind me then, because my Bible has a little page over here on the faith. Well, maybe I'll just read that part right now. Faith is an intense form of trust, and people's relationship with God has always operated on the basis of faith. Time and time again, all throughout the Bible, salvation is found in the same way, trusting God's promises by faith, then following God's commands. Hebrews 11 looks at faith through the lens of the stories of people who lived their lives by faith in God. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. And these biblical characters were commended for having such faith, understanding that faith was necessary to please God. Faith was necessary to please God. So is that witness? In faith, Abel offered a costly sacrifice, and Enoch lived in a way that pleased God. Noah obeyed divine warnings and built a giant ark, never having seen a drop of rain. Abraham left his hometown of Ur and went out, not knowing where God was leading. Sarah bore Isaac in her old age, and the stories continue. Because of the examples of these faithful ones, we should be motivated to lay aside every weight that threatens to slow us down in our pursuit of God's kingdom. When we do, we will be much better able to run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus as our ultimate example of determination and faithfulness. All right, Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is going to be verses 4 to 40, starting with verse 4. It's entitled The Demonstration of Faith, and starting with verse 4, it has Abel and it has faith worshiping. The background story is in Genesis 4, 1 to 10. Abel was a righteous man because of faith. God had revealed to Adam and his descendants the true way of worship, and Abel obeyed God by faith. In fact, his obedience cost him his life. Cain was not a child of God, and there's a reference to 1 John 3:12, because he did not have faith. He was religious but not righteous. Abel speaks to us today as the first martyr of the faith. Verses 5 and 6. Enoch, faith walking. Our faith in God grows as we fellowship with God. We must have both the desire to please him and the diligence to seek him. Prayer, meditating on the word, worship, and discipline, all of these help us in our walk with God. Enoch walked with God in the wicked world before the flood came. He was able to keep his life pure. Enoch was taken to heaven one day and seen no more. Abel died a violent death, but Enoch never died. God has a different plan for each one who trusts him. Some see in the translation of Enoch a picture of the rapture of the church when Jesus Christ returns. Verse 7, this is Noah, faith working. Noah's faith involved the whole person. His mind was warned of God, his heart was moved with fear, and his will acted on what God told him. Since nobody at that time had ever seen a flood, or perhaps even a rainstorm, Noah's actions must have generated a great deal of interest and probably ridicule as well. Noah's faith influenced his whole family, and they were saved. It also condemned the whole world, for his faith revealed their unbelief. Events proved that Noah was right. Jesus used this experience to warn people to be ready for his return.
Okay, say that
And
again. He condemned the whole world because it revealed.
it condemned the whole world for his faith revealed their unbelief.
That's true. I never thought about that.
I think I read somewhere one time that back in Noah's day, and I'm not well versed on this, that there was no rain.
Right.
So the fact that he was building this ark, people were ridiculing enabling him.
Yeah, there was a mist on the ground, and that's how the earth was watered. Yeah, we would have thought he was crazy, probably.
I never
Yeah.
heard that, Cindy.
Did
Events
you not
prove
go through the Grow in the Word class? Stan's
A
Grow.
very, very long time ago.
That's where I learned it.
Events proved that Noah was right. Jesus used this experience to warn people to be ready for his return. In Noah's day, the people were involved in innocent everyday activities and completely ignored Noah's witness. Then we're going into verses 8 to 22, the patriarchs, faith waiting. The emphasis in this section is on the promise of God and his plans for the nation of Israel. The nation began with the call of Abraham. God promised Abraham and Sarah a son, but they had to wait 25 years for the fulfillment of promise. Their son Isaac became the father of Jacob and Esau, and it was Jacob who really built the nation through the birth of his 12 sons. Joseph saved the nation in the land of Egypt, and Moses would later deliver them from Egypt. Waiting is, for me, one of the most difficult disciplines of life, yet true faith is able to wait for the fulfillment of God's purpose in God's time. But while we are waiting, we must also be obeying. By faith, Abraham obeyed. Verse 8. He obeyed when he did not know where he was going. He lived in tents because he was a stranger and a pilgrim in the world and had to be ready to move whenever God spoke. Christians today are also strangers and pilgrims. And there's a reference to 1 Peter 1:1 and 2:11. Abraham had his eyes on the city and lived in the future tense. He also obeyed when he did not know how God's will would be accomplished. Verses 11 to 12. Both Abraham and Sarah were too old to have children, yet they both believed that God would do the miracle. Unbelief asked, how can this be? Faith asked, how shall this be? Abraham believed and obeyed God when he did not know when God would fulfill his promises. Verses 13 to 16. None of the patriarchs saw the complete fulfillment of God's promises, but they saw from afar off what God was doing. Dr. George Morrison, a great Scottish preacher, once said, the important thing is not what we live in, but what we look for. These men and women of faith lived in tents, but they knew a heavenly city awaited them. God always fulfills his promises to his believing people, either immediately or ultimately. Finally, Abraham obeyed God by faith when he did not know why God was so working. Verses 17 to 19. Why would God want Abraham to sacrifice his son when it was the Lord who gave him that son? All of a future nation's promises were wrapped up in Isaac. The tests of faith become more difficult as we walk with God, yet the rewards are more wonderful. And we must not ignore the obedience of Isaac. In Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, we have 4 generations of faith. These men sometimes failed, but basically they were men of faith. They were not perfect, but they were devoted to God and trusted his word. Isaac passed the promises and blessings along to Jacob in Genesis 27, and Jacob shared them with his 12 sons in Genesis 48 to 49. Jacob was a pilgrim, for even as he was dying, he leaned on his pilgrim staff. The faith of Joseph was certainly remarkable. After the way his family treated him, you would think he would have abandoned his faith, but instead it grew stronger. Even the ungodly influence of Egypt did not weaken his trust in God. Joseph did not use his family, his job, or his circumstances as an excuse for unbelief. Joseph knew what he believed, that God would one day deliver his people from Egypt. Joseph also knew where he belonged, in Canaan, not in Egypt. So he made them promise to carry his remains out of Egypt at the Exodus, and they did. We have to admire the faith of the patriarchs. They did not have a complete Bible, and yet their faith was strong. They handed God's promises down from one generation to another. In spite of their failures and testings, these men and women believed God, and he bore witness to their faith. How much more faith you and I should have. Then we have in verses 23 to 29, Moses' faith warring. Moses was fortunate to have believing parents. For them to hide their baby son from the authorities was certainly an act of faith. The account is given in Exodus 2, 1 to 10. Moses' parents were named Amram and Jochebed. Though godly parents cannot pass on faith, they can certainly create an atmosphere of faith at home and be examples to their children. A home should be the first school of faith for a child. Three great themes relating to faith are seen in the life of Moses. First, the refusal of faith, verses 24 to 25. As the adopted son of the Egyptian princess, Moses could have led an easy life in the palace, but his faith moved him to refuse that kind of life. He chose to identify with God's suffering people. True faith causes a believer to hold the right values and make the right decisions. The phrase pleasure of sin does not refer only to lust and other gross sins. The phrase describes a way of life that we today would call successful. Position, prestige, power, wealth, and freedom from problems. Moses' refusal of faith led to the reproach of faith. The mayor of the large American city moved into a dangerous and decayed housing project to demonstrate the problems and needs of the minorities. But she also kept her fashionable apartment and eventually moved out of the slum. We commend her for her courage, but we have.
I'm sorry, Kathy. It said there are three great things of Moses's faith. And now it's
Right.
saying, did I get this right? Refusal of faith.
The first one was refusal of faith. Yeah,
He
that
was
was
scared?
the first one we did. Huh?
I think that was in relation to him being Pharaoh's daughter. Or I mean,
son.
Yeah.
Pharaoh's, the daughter, son of Pharaoh's daughter. He
So
refused to do that.
refusal of the Egyptian rearage.
Life.
That's what I
Right.
took it as, but I may be wrong.
Yeah. He refused to live the life that he could have lived there.
Thank you.
Oh, that makes sense. Also, with the rain and the mist, it's in Genesis 2, verse, say 5, 6. It says, the Lord had caused it to, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground, and a mist was going up from the land and was watering the whole face of the ground.
Isn't it crazy how much we miss? I mean, it's right there. It just.
That's when they believe like there was this is a whole different subject, but they believe like there was the dome of water that went around the earth, and then when the flood happened, so it was like a greenhouse effect, and so you had the moisture and everything and then when the flood happened, you had this huge amount of water then that came down, and a whole other study.
So I have a question with Moses. I don't mean to veer off, Kathy. Did he know the Pharaoh's daughter was not his real mother, and what happened?
I don't know if he did right away, but I think eventually somehow he did. I mean, I don't know that I ever really read anything or heard anybody say because he was a baby. So
Yeah.
You think of kids who are abandoned, who are adopted, who have never known their real parents. I'm thinking
they had his mom come and breastfeed him.
That's true.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
the nanny.
And I think like I could be wrong, I was just pulling this out of my memory, but I'm thinking like it was not uncommon for them to breastfeed till these kids were like at least 4.
Yeah.
So
I'm just
He
wondering
probably
if
gave
he
him the
ever knew.
influence. His real mother probably, as she was nursing him, gave him that influence, from his real life. I
Real
would think,
heritage.
yeah, I would think. But
Yeah, that makes sense.
when he maybe knew, okay, she's my real mom, or this, I know she's not my mom.
Yeah.
I guess when we go back to Genesis,
Do you think maybe the mother sang to him while she was nursing?
oh, I'm
I
sure.
would think.
That would give him some insight, even, I don't know.
The
Well,
Jewish lullabies.
Yeah, and she could have passed on a lot of Jewish heritage and information. I don't know.
Information.
Well, I'm thinking like if I was his mom and I wasn't able to raise him, but I was able to hold him and love him, and like those moments would have been super important. But I would have thought she would have been like influencing him a lot because if she was the nanny, like then basically nannies are raising the children.
Yeah.
I mean, the Fair's daughter would have been busy taking her lavender baths and getting her
Mhm.
beauty treatments, I would think.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kathy.
That's all right. Okay, we are on the reproach of faith. Moses' refusal of the faith led to the reproach of faith. He left. We commend her for her courage, but we have to admire Moses even more. He left the palace and never went back to the old life. He identified with the Jewish slaves. Men and women of faith often have to bear reproach and suffering. The apostles suffered for their faith. Contemporary believers behind the Iron Curtain knew that it was to bear reproach, knew what it was to bear reproach. If reproach is an evidence of true faith, we wonder how much more true faith there is in our own country today. Finally, there is the reward of faith. This is 26b to 29. God always rewards true faith, if not immediately or at least ultimately. Over against the treasures in Egypt, Moses saw the recompense of the reward. As Dr. Vance Havner said, Moses chose the imperishable, saw the invisible, and did the impossible. Moses' faith enabled him to face Pharaoh unafraid and to trust God to deal with the enemy. The endurance of Moses was not a natural gift, for by nature Moses was hesitant and retiring. This endurance and courage came as a reward of his faith. The faith of Moses was rewarded with deliverance for him and his people. Faith brings us out, verse 28, takes us through in verse 29, and brings us in verse 30. When we trust God, we get what God can do, but when we trust ourselves, we get only what weak people can do. The experience of Moses is proof that true biblical faith means obeying God in spite of circumstances and in spite of consequences. If you and I had been writing this chapter, the next section would be faith wandering. But there is no mention of Israel's failure and 40 years of wasted time. Why? Because that was an experience of unbelief, not faith. The writer did not use this experience in Hebrews 3 and 4 as an illustration. Sorry, let me go back. The writer did use this experience in Hebrews 3 and 4 as an illustration of doubting the word, but nowhere in Hebrews 11 will you find a record of any failure because of unbelief. Faith records only the victories. Then in verses 30 and 31, we have Joshua and Rahab, faith winning. The account of the conquest of Jericho is found in Joshua 2 to 6. Joshua and Moses Joshua was Moses' successor as leader of Israel, and he succeeded because he trusted the same God that Moses had trusted. God changes his workmen, but he does not change his principles of operation. He blesses faith and he judges unbelief. From a human point of view, Jericho was an impossible city to conquer. However, Joshua's first act of faith was not the defeat of the city, but the crossing of the Jordan River. By faith, the nation crossed the river just as the previous generation had crossed the Red Sea. This was a witness and a warning to the Canaanite nations that Israel was marching forward by the power of God. Rahab was a harlot, an unlikely person to put faith in the true God of Israel. She was saved by grace because the other inhabitants of the city were marked out for death. God in his mercy and grace permitted Rahab to live, but she was saved by faith. What she knew about God is recorded in Joshua 2, 8-14. She knew that Jehovah had delivered Israel from Egypt and that he had opened the Red Sea, but that was 40 years before. She also knew God had defeated other nations during Israel's wilderness wanderings. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath, Joshua 2:11. That was her testimony of faith, and God honored it. She was saved unto good works. True faith must always show itself in good works, James 2:20-26. She protected the spies, put the cord in the window as directed, and apparently won her family to the true faith, and in every way obeyed the Lord. Not only was Rahab delivered from judgment, but she became part of the nation of Israel. She married Salmon and gave birth to Boaz, who was an ancestor of King David. Imagine a pagan harlot becoming a part of the ancestry of Jesus Christ. That is what faith can do. Rahab is certainly a rebuke to unsaved people who give excuses for not trusting Christ. I don't know very much about the Bible is an excuse I often hear. Rahab knew very little spiritual truth, but she acted on what she did know. I am too bad to be saved is another excuse. But Rahab was condemned heathen, harlot. Another excuse is, what will my family think? Rahab's first concern was saving her family, not opposing them. She stands as one of the great women of faith in the Bible. Verses 32-40, various heroes of faith. Faith can operate in the life of any person who will dare to listen to God's word and surrender to God's will. What a variety of personalities we have here. Gideon was a frightened farmer whose faith did not grow strong right away. Barak won a resounding victory over Sisera, but he needed Deborah, the prophetess, as his helper to assure him. Both Gideon and Barak are encouragements to us who falter in our faith. The story of Samson is familiar. We would not call Samson a godly man, for he yielded to his fleshly appetites. He was a Nazirite, which meant he was dedicated to God and was never to cut his hair or partake of the fruit of the wine. Samson did trust God to help and deliver him, and in the end, Samson was willing to give his life to defeat the enemy. However, we must not conclude that believers today can expect to lead double lives and still enjoy God's blessing. Jephthah's story is fascinating. It is unlikely that he sacrificed his only daughter as a burnt offering, for this was forbidden in Israel. Probably he dedicated her to the Lord on the basis of the law of vows, dedicating her to perpetual virginity. I think we talked about that.
Yeah, because
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think we got upset about that.
Yeah, we did.
remember she went off in the mountain with her friends.
Yeah.
Right.
It is not possible for us to examine each example of faith, and even the writer of Hebrews stopped citing names after he mentioned David and Samuel, who were certainly great men of faith. There are examples in the Old Testament of men and women who won the victories referred to in Hebrews 11:33-35. David certainly subdued kingdoms and wrought righteousness. Daniel's faith stopped the mouths of lions, and the 3 Hebrew children overcame the power of the fiery furnace. The women of faith mentioned in Hebrews 11:35 have stories given in 1 Kings 17:17 to 24, and 2 Kings 4:18 to 37. The transition in Hebrews 11:35 is important. Not all men and women of faith experienced miraculous deliverance. Some were tortured and died. The word translated others in Hebrews 11:36 means others of a different land. These others had faith, but God did not see fit to deal with them in the same way he dealt with Moses, Gideon, and David. While making a hospital visit, I found a patient lying in bed weeping. "What's the matter?" I asked. Her reply was to hand me a book that she had that day received in the mail. It was on divine healing and the power of faith. Some anonymous person had written on the flyleaf, "Read this book and it will give you faith to be healed." The patient happened to be a dedicated Christian who trusted God even in the midst of suffering. But her anonymous correspondence thought that all people with faith should be delivered miraculously. I have personally experienced God's miracle touch on my body when others were sure I would die. I know that God can heal, but I also know that God does not have to heal in order to prove that I have faith. The writer of Hebrews 11:36 to 38 record the fact that many unknown men and women of faith were not delivered from difficult circumstances, yet God honored their faith. In fact, it takes more faith to endure than it does to escape. Like the 3 Hebrew children, we should trust God and obey him even if he does not deliver us. Man's estimate of these heroes of faith was a low one, so men persecuted them, arrested them, tortured them, and in some cases killed them. But God's estimate is entirely different. He said that the world was not worthy of these people. The Apostle Paul is a good illustration of this truth. Festus said that Paul was out of his mind. The Jews said Paul was not fit to live. Paul himself said he was treated like the filth of the world, the offscouring of all things. Yet Paul was God's chosen vessel, probably the greatest Christian who ever lived. Faith enables us to turn from the approval of the world and seek only the approval of God. If God is glorified by delivering his people, he will do it. If he sees fit to be glorified by not delivering his people, then he will do that. But we must never conclude that the absence of deliverance means lack of faith on the part of God's children. Faith looks to the future, for that is where the greatest rewards are found. The people named in this chapter, and those unnamed, did not receive the promises, but they had God's witness to their faith that one day they would be rewarded. God's purpose involves Old Testament saints as well as New Testament saints. One day all of us shall share that heavenly city that true saints look for by faith. We today should give thanks for these saints of old, for they were faithful during difficult times, and yet we are the ones who have received the better blessing. They saw some of the blessings afar off, but we enjoy them today through Jesus Christ. If the saints of old had not trusted God and obeyed his will, Israel would have perished and the Messiah would not have been born. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11:6. But this kind of faith grows as we listen to his word and fellowship and worship and prayer. Faith is possible to all kinds of believers in all kinds of situations. It is not a luxury for a few elite saints. It is a necessity for all of God's people. Lord, increase our faith. Again.
I think if we only had faith because we wanted something, it really wouldn't be faith. I mean, wouldn't we be doing it so we got to pay off? Like, would that then truly be love? I do know people that do believe like that. Like, if you don't have, like, you're sick because you don't have enough faith, and it's like,
Yeah, I don't like that at all. And I've been told that before. And I don't see To me, it's very intimate and personal between each person and Christ and God.
Yeah.
And how dare I ever question somebody else's relationship or faith?
Right.
I just couldn't do it.
I mean, I think it's always for me, like you just say, each walk is personal. I think the same thing with health, like each walk is individual. But I feel like for me, like I always think, okay, Lord, if I've done something, then I want you to reveal that to me, because it is possible, we know that. But yeah, like I don't want to be Job's friend.
I was told that years ago when I was having panic attacks and I didn't realize it was panic attacks. I didn't know what was the matter with me. And I was going for counseling to a preacher. And basically that's what he told me, that it was because of my faith that I was going through that I did not have enough of faith. And I'm like, okay, and at that point he told me like, and you can go get all kinds of medicine that you want, and that isn't going to fix you. I'm like, okay.
So what did you do?
Well, I ended up going to the doctor and I did get something, and I was on for years. I was on a prescription for panic attacks. And I honestly, I feel God healed me of that because about a year, it was after I retired, and Frank was already going through his struggles with his health, and we were dealing with all that. And it was about a year probably before he passed that I decided I didn't want to take this medicine anymore. I did not want to take it. And I myself started to wean myself off of it. And I know my doctor, when I had told her, she said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "I need to try. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back on it. But I really don't want to take this medicine." And so I did. I weaned myself off of it. And right, right when Frank died, I was pretty much off of it. And I have to say, I have not had any panic attacks, and I would have thought that would have brought it on. So I think that was a healing.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was, but
Well, regardless how you got it, it was, you know what I mean? Like I feel
or
like
it was God preparing me for what was about to happen.
Yeah.
well, I mean, like you think about the mental gymnastics in your younger life too. I think there's a lot wrapped up in our health issues, mental and physical. I'm glad you don't have them anymore, though. That's a praise.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, not that I don't get anxious sometimes, but nothing like I used to get. I mean, it used to be when Frank used to joke with me. He would go on a fishing trip for the weekend. He'd say, "I'd know to check the hospital as soon as I got home because I'd know you wouldn't be home because you were worried to death or panicked or something, Because that happened a couple of times. He'd be gone and I would just panic when he was gone. I had the boys here, but it was, I don't know what it was, but I honestly think, I don't know whether, like I said, whether God was preparing me for what was ahead.
I think if you think about it, that a statement like that from anybody, so God works on us from the inside. And it's all in his timing, and he knows you personally and what it's going to take. He's the only one that knows how to move in your life, and it's all about him. And for anybody to be like, "Oh, you don't have enough faith, you can't, go ahead and get your well, it's like sometimes our health just requires a more acute intervention, and while God's working on the inside, like it's all in his time. And then he's going to bring about that when you're ready. He's the only one that knows when you're ready. And he did, he brought about the lack of anxiety. He just knew what you needed. And when you needed to be healed, he provided that. It's just, I agree with you. Cindy. That's just appalling, because nobody knows God's timing, and it's different with each person.
I was going to say Mel Robbins. I was trying to think of the book that it might have been in the one she just wrote. I don't know. You would probably be interested in this, Kathy. She did an interview with The Diary of a CEO. It's a podcast. You can find it on YouTube. But one of the things she was talking about in there was when she was, did I share this with you guys before? Like she went on a ski trip.
I don't think.
I found this really, really interesting, and I think has a lot of truth in it. So she had a great family, the extended family, they all got together and went on a family ski trip. And all the kids bunked in a room, and she woke up in the middle of the night, and one of the boys was molesting her. And she didn't say anything because she looked over and saw, I think she said her little brother. And so she didn't want it to happen to him. So she just let it happen. And she said the next morning when she got up and went down for breakfast, her mom said, "Oh, hi," as she's flipping pancakes, "Hi, honey, how did you sleep?" And I said, whatever, fine. She goes, that was the beginning of me lying about things. And she goes, and then as I got older, she goes, I kind of forgot about it. And she said that as I got older, though, she goes, I would wake up in the morning and I would be having anxiety attacks and I would be anxious. And she said, I didn't know why. And she said, what happened is like in her brain was this memory, and it was connected to when she woke up in the morning. And she said, and I started lying about stuff. And she goes, but it was all connected to like that I lied to my mom. And so I think like we are so complicated in our bodies and our mind and spirit. It's like Kim said, only God knows those things. And anyway, so she went on to talk about in that interview, like what she did, like retraining the brain and all of that, which I thought was really, you may enjoy that interview if you can find it. I know she's been on a couple of times, so I'm not sure which one it was. I'm going to guess it's not the 5-second rule. So I would look at the latest book she wrote. It's probably that one if you're interested in that. But it's really like we are so connected, and our body does keep the score. It absolutely keeps the score.
Yep.
If we don't deal with stuff, it's in there.
Yep.
Hence my liver healing.
It always comes out at some point.
Yeah. And it's when the brain is ready to deal with things too. It's like the brain's like an onion, and it knows when your body isn't ready to deal with things. And your body also knows when people are not safe. Like it won't, it's just very, very connected. And I think the more we seek God, the more he reveals it. Yeah. All right. Well, we did not make it to Tony. So we will do that tomorrow. And then Cindy, do you have your list of questions can you have them ready for tomorrow?
Yes. I have them.
Okay. All right. So then we'll finish Tony tomorrow, and then maybe we'll go into that list of questions and see if we can figure out who they are.
Okay. Sounds good.
That sounds like fun. Okay. And how did we say we were going to close this? This is the
for sure and certain.
For sure and for certain.
This concludes the reading of God's word for today. We'll meet tomorrow for sure and for certain.
For certain.
Amen.
All right. Love you guys.
Amen.
Love you.
Bye.